We can trust someone who makes such serious mistakes. Just do the menial tasks. The president's daughter, who had set me up, laughed triumphantly. It was clear harassment, an unreasonable scolding in public. Every day, the stress of only doing menial work piled up. I had reached my limit. Unable to endure the tough workplace, I finally applied for a leave of absence and returned to my parents' home. I barely managed to live on aimlessly, only going outside for walks as my parents suggested. That day, as I was slowly walking around the neighborhood, something large and black at the edge of the road caught my eye. I squinted, thinking someone might have left bulky trash, but then I noticed it was slightly moving. Startled, I rushed over. It was a person, crouching down. The severely emaciated woman slowly lifted her head at the sound of my footsteps. Forgetting I hadn't spoken to anyone but my parents in a while, I blurted out, "Can you stand? My house is nearby. You're welcome to rest there if you'd like." This single act significantly changed my fate. I'm John, 56 years old. I'm a single man enjoying watching movies. 20 years ago, I changed jobs and have been working at MT Inc. for 14 years now. MT Inc. mainly provides services that allow anyone to create websites, including website management and hosting seminars. My department handles customer support. It's a job requiring a lot of knowledge and communication skills, with many opportunities for direct customer interactions. Although dealing with complaints can be stressful, the job is immensely rewarding. Our department is tightly knit and has a friendly atmosphere. Thanks to my long tenure, I've accumulated a lot of knowledge, and thankfully, both my colleagues and customers appreciate me. However, lately, a tense atmosphere started brewing at work. The trigger was the assignment of a new employee named Nancy to our department. Nancy was actually the daughter of the CEO. This was textbook nepotism. Still, we tried to welcome her without any preconceptions. But, excuse me, what gives you the right to give me orders? Nancy snapped at her trainer on her very first day. We were all stunned, and then Nancy continued, "I don't know what you're misunderstanding, but as the CEO's daughter, I outrank all of you. And don't forget, I can tell my dad anything when I get home." Nancy kept looking down on us. Any employee who tried to correct her would be silenced with the mention of her father's name, and everyone shrank in her presence. Neither the manager nor the director could stand up to Nancy, who used her father's influence to her advantage. Nancy did as she pleased, passing her work onto others while claiming all the credit for herself, making everyone constantly look down to avoid getting picked on by her. Our once collaborative and bright supporting department had completely changed. Nevertheless, someone had to interact with Nancy for work to proceed. Since I was the team leader, it fell on me to give Nancy instructions and correct her. "Nancy, please handle this document. And when you answer the phone, don't just say hello, but introduce yourself with the company's name, okay?" That's how my conversations with Nancy usually went. She clearly resented me for repeatedly reminding her and bringing her work. Then one day, as I happened to pass by Nancy's desk, I overheard her on the phone and couldn't believe my ears. "Huh? I don't know about that. Isn't that your problem?" She was talking to a customer. Shocked by her unbelievable response, I hurriedly told her to hand over the phone. After I introduced myself and apologized, a weary voice came from the other end. The caller was a longtime customer, a company president who had been using our services and helping out with seminars. My face turned pale as I listened and apologized profusely, asking what had happened. Hearing the details from the other person, my face grew even more troubled. It turned out Nancy was supposed to visit the customer's company the day before but had stood them up without any notice. And now, she was responding with the same attitude to the president who had called to inquire. I apologized multiple times and assured them I would personally handle the matter. Originally, I was in charge of this company and had been gradually handing it over to Nancy. Finally, I got "I trust you." I managed to get their forgiveness and hung up. Then, I turned to Nancy, who was idly fiddling with her nails, and spoke to her in a stern tone. "Nancy, what happened this time is a problem both as a member of the support team and as a professional in society." I started off like that and continued lecturing Nancy without giving her a chance to interrupt. Nancy's face turned red, and she trembled with anger. Then, suddenly, she slammed her hand on the desk with a loud noise and stormed out of the room. From that incident, I became a complete enemy in Nancy's eyes. She resented me for embarrassing her in front of everyone and began to harass me. Not only did she mock me repeatedly, but she also took on all kinds of work and then dumped it all on me. Even though I knew she disliked me, I firmly scolded her, but of course, she ignored. Knowing that any more arguing would only hinder our work, I had no choice but to silently carry on with my tasks. I've never minded doing silent work or studying. Seeing this, Nancy seemed annoyed. A few months went by like this. Then one day, I was suddenly called by the director. Confused, I entered the designated meeting room to find the director alone, looking terribly pale. When I asked if he was okay, he weakly nodded and gestured for me to sit down. After a moment of silence, the manager spoke gravely. "John, I'm sorry, but you're going to have to step down as team leader." "What?" I couldn't help but ask him to repeat himself. He averted his eyes while reiterating that I was being removed from my role as team leader. Apparently, there had been a significant error in a recent quote for a new service proposal to an existing client, resulting in the client canceling all contracts with us. And since I was the one who had made the proposal and quote, I was being held responsible. This was all news to me. I objected to the director's accusations, but he wouldn't listen. The director, for some reason, kept apologizing repeatedly but did not revoke the decision in the end. I left the meeting room feeling dazed and returned to my desk. I racked my brain, trying to understand why this was happening. I couldn't think of any reason for the director's unjust decision, but he wasn't the kind of person to make unfair judgments. With my hands on my forehead, deep in thought, I didn't notice someone approaching me. "John, is everything all right?" Nancy asked me with a smirk. Seeing her triumphant face, I instinctively thought, this must be her doing. But I had no proof. All I could do was silently look away. The next day, to my disbelief, Nancy became the new team leader in my place. My suspicions turned into certainty. Under Nancy's direction, responsibilities were reassigned, and my clients were all given to other employees, with her saying, "We can trust someone who makes such serious mistakes. Just do the menial tasks." What was I left with? Restocking paper and watering the plants. Having always found meaning and purpose in my work, these days brought me immense stress. Furthermore, Nancy started excluding me from meetings, not letting me into the meeting room, and it became common for me to be scolded loudly in front of others. Most of these scoldings were unreasonable, and her shrill voice drained me of any will to respond. Sleepless nights became more frequent, and I lost my appetite. The tears that would spontaneously flow made me realize something was seriously wrong with me, but I felt helpless. Seeing my condition, my colleagues finally suggested I see a doctor. The doctor said my symptoms were due to excessive stress and recommended I take a leave of absence. Following the doctor's advice, I processed my leave and went back to my parents' home in another state, which I hadn't visited in a while. My parents, now 80 and 78 years old, were living there alone. They warmly welcomed a frail-looking me. Since I hardly ate properly when alone, they took great care of me. Thanks to them, I gradually regained some strength, but thoughts of the company still weighed heavily on me. My mother suggested I go jogging daily. Their home was surrounded by nature, and not many people. Agreeing with her that it was much better than staying cooped up at home, I started going for walks every day despite my heavy body. That day, as I was slowly walking around the neighborhood, something large and black at the edge of the road caught my eye. I squinted, wondering if it was someone's bulky trash, but then noticed it was slightly moving. I suddenly realized what was happening and started running in a panic. It was a person, crouching down. I approached and asked if they were okay. The severely emaciated woman slowly lifted her head in response to my voice. Her skin was rough, her hair unkempt. Most notably, she had a large bruise on her cheek and a cut at the corner of her mouth, bleeding. Sensing this was no ordinary situation, I asked her, "Can you stand? My house is nearby. You can rest there if you like," and offered my hand. I led the hesitant woman back to my house. Today, both my parents were out, so the house was empty. I hesitated to bring her inside but decided it would be better to tend to her in a calm environment. At the entrance, I said, "Please, come in," and she entered, clearly wary. Still, she followed my lead to the living room while I went back to the kitchen. I moistened a clean towel and warmed it in the microwave for a few seconds. Returning to the living room with the warm towel, I offered it to her, saying, "It looks like you're bleeding from your mouth. If it doesn't hurt, please use this to wipe it." She took the towel with a puzzled look, then murmured it's warm as she glanced down at it. After watching her wipe her face awkwardly, I went back to the kitchen. This time, I toasted some bread and warmed up a cup of milk. Then I brought them to the living room. The woman widened her eyes in surprise when she saw the tray I was carrying. She hesitantly reached for the tray and started to eat the bread, as tears streaming down her face. I was startled by her unexpected reaction and hurriedly reassured her. However, it didn't seem like the bread displeased her, as she whispered in a small voice, thank you so much. I will definitely repay you." I smiled and replied, "Don't mention it," as I watched her finish the bread and milk. Sitting down in front of her, I started to make small talk. It had been a while since I conversed with someone other than my parents, and I found my awkwardness somewhat amusing. The woman, who introduced herself as Anna, seemed hesitant, so I cautiously asked, "If you don't mind, could you tell me why you were there?" Anna's shoulders trembled as she averted my gaze. I patiently waited for her to start speaking. She closed her eyes briefly, then slowly opened them and began to speak. "I've run away from my home. What should I do?" Anna started to speak hesitantly. Anna met a man 3 years ago from a dating app. He was a freelancer, dreaming of making a major debut as a singer while juggling multiple part-time jobs. They both had been in bands in high school, thus that experience drew them closer. They shared the same taste in music and humor. Anna found herself admiring his pursuit of his dream. Wanting to support his dream, she ignored everyone's opposition and married him without dating first. Her husband, a man with somewhat conventional mindset, urged Anna to quit her job after their marriage. Anna, who had just started her career as a pharmacist after graduating from college, hesitantly agreed, wanting to support the man she loved. He tried to support them by taking on more part-time jobs and working late-night shifts. However, their once peaceful, albeit not wealthy, married life began to deteriorate after 6 months. Her husband started to adopt an aggressive attitude towards Anna. It began with subtle, stinging sarcasm and escalated into severe verbal abuse. Feeling guilty for relying solely on her husband for financial support, Anna silently accepted his behavior. She convinced herself that it was unavoidable, considering his stress and tiredness. One day, when sudden outbursts and demeaning behavior towards Anna had become a daily occurrence, she lightly suggested, "Maybe I should start working too." It was just a simple wish to alleviate her husband's burden. But before she could finish, she found herself on the floor, struck down. Anna looked up at her husband in shock. He had hit her with no mercy. He yelled, "Are you mocking me?" Anna hurriedly denied it and apologized repeatedly, but from that day on, physical abuse became more frequent. Not only that, but her husband also began to impose strict control over her life. Working outside was, of course, forbidden, and so was going out in general. He also demanded she maintain her weight around 88 pounds, limiting her food intake to 1 meal a day. From what I could see, Anna was around 5.3 feet tall. I was astonished at the impossibility of maintaining such a weight at her height. Anna wanted to protest, but the fear of further violence kept her silent. Naturally, the lack of proper nutrition affected her physical and mental health, and she couldn't maintain her strength. Anna started to experience noticeable changes, like being bedridden and unable to perform household chores as before. However, if her husband caught her resting during the day or lagging in her chores, he would punish her by further restricting her meals. Anna was enduring days of pushing her already exhausted body to its limits. Having married against her parents' wishes, she was estranged from them and had no one to turn to, both physically and emotionally distant. Her husband checked her phone daily, leaving her too frightened to contact anyone for help. Anna was undoubtedly cornered. Then this morning, while serving breakfast, she fainted from dizziness, only to be slapped by her husband, who showed no concern. Her weakened body couldn't withstand it, and her brain shook. At that moment, Anna instinctively felt she couldn't survive like this any longer. After her husband left for work, she fled the house semi-consciously, only to be found by me not far from home. Anna said, "I'm terrified of when he'll notice I've left the house. I have to go back soon." And then she collapsed onto the floor and started crying. Her thin body was shaking violently. Hearing her painful story, I felt a shiver myself, but I knew I couldn't let her go back to that situation. Trying to sound as calm as possible, I suggested that we go to the police together. However, upon hearing this, Anna cried out, "I can't. Who knows what he might do to me?" I tried not to be swayed by her desperate cry and gently placed my hand on her shoulder. "The police can separate you from your husband, and there are temporary shelters available for civilians. If you keep enduring this, it could lead to the worst possible outcome." I slowly but firmly spoke to her while looking directly into her tearful eyes and reassuring her. But going to the police meant confronting her husband. The stronger the memory of being attacked is, the greater the fear of standing up to the attacker is. I knew this all too well myself. "Anna, you know, I'm actually on leave from my job." I suddenly started to share, and Anna looked at me questioningly. I briefly explained the treatment I had received at my workplace. Words and treatments that continually denied my personality. The daily exposure to such abuse. The pain inflicted by someone younger than me had stripped away my ability to resist. Anna listened intently. Her face was serious. Smiling at her, I said, "But I've made a decision. I won't let myself be a victim anymore. So, would you join me in this fight?" Anna's eyes widened at my words. Then, lifting her tearful eyes firmly, she answered in a trembling voice, "Yes." Together, we went to the nearest police station. Following the officer's advice, Anna filed a report of abuse. Given the multiple injuries on her body, the officer said her husband could be arrested soon. Hearing this, Anna's face lit up with relief, tears welling up in her eyes. I searched for nearby private shelters on my phone and listed some options. After discussing with the officer, Anna decided to temporarily stay at a facility a bit farther away in the county. Since Anna had left home abruptly, she didn't even have her phone with her. Concerned about her going alone, I decided to drive her to the shelter. Upon arrival, a kind-looking woman with glasses, who had been informed beforehand, welcomed us. Aware of the nominal fee for the shelter, I paid for a week's stay and sign off. Anna kept thanking me, but her expression was much brighter than when she had been crying at my house, bringing me a sense of relief. "Here's my contact information. Don't hesitate to reach out if you need anything," I said, handing her a piece of paper with my phone number hastily scribbled on it, then left. Anna kept waving until my car was out of sight. Several days had passed since that tumultuous day. My phone, which rarely rang these days, suddenly indicated an incoming call. The screen showed private number. I hesitated for a moment, then, with a start, pressed the call button. "Is this John?" "It's Anna," said the caller, as expected. She apologized for calling from a payphone, as she still didn't have a cell phone. I stopped Anna from repeatedly thanking me, and asked her how things had been since that day. She cheerfully told me about the events following our visit to the police. "After a few days at the shelter, I've started living in a new house with government support," she said. Her new place, although a bit far, was easily reachable by car. Having been worried about Anna, I felt a deep sense of relief and congratulated her on starting a new life. Since then, I occasionally brought food and other necessities to her house. Anna, still without an income, gratefully accepted these gifts. Each time I visited, she looked noticeably healthier. Her cheeks had regained their roundness, and her hair shone again. At 28, Anna, with her droopy eyes, looked much younger than her age and was quite beautiful. Given the significant age difference between us, I found her admiration for me heartwarming, almost like what a father would feel for a daughter. My parents, having learned about Anna through me, doted on her as if she were their own grandchild. Despite her frail appearance that day, Anna now shows a much brighter demeanor and is actively looking for a job. Helping her with job searches, I, too, felt inspired to change. Seeing her determinedly moving forward, I naturally started thinking, I want to work again too. One day, about a year later, Anna called me with a request. When I listened in detail, she expressed a desire to reconcile with her estranged parents. I realize now that they were just looking out for me back then. I want to be able to laugh with my family again, she said. I wholeheartedly agreed with her decision, but I had to put a stop to her next words, because she asked me to accompany her to meet her parents. I'm just an outsider. It's a family matter. Maybe it's better if I'm not there, I responded, gently declining her request. But Anna, usually so compliant, insisted. I might end up saying what I didn't mean if I go alone. But with you, John, I feel like I can be brave and open up about my true feelings. Anna pleaded repeatedly. Finally, I gave in to her earnest request, because I felt a paternal concern for her. How could I refuse? Without any hesitation, Anna and I decided to visit her parents' home the following Saturday. Her house was so impressively large that it left me speechless. Arriving at the front door, Anna looked at me with a lost child's expression. I nodded encouragingly from a distance. Anna pressed the doorbell resolutely. After a while, a well-dressed woman around my age appeared, greeting us with a hello. Upon seeing Anna, she exclaimed in surprise, "Anna." Her reaction indicated that she was Anna's mother. "Mom, I'm back," Anna said awkwardly. "Yes, welcome back," her mother replied stiffly. I watched nervously as they exchanged uneasy greetings. Breaking the awkward silence, her mother asked, "Anna, where have you been all this time?" Her words sounded accusatory, but her tone was gentle, filled with concern. Anna, sensing this, clenched her lips before starting to recount her ordeal. She talked about her marriage, living out of state, and the harsh treatment from her husband. At the time when she was reaching her limits, she managed to escape her situation with the help of many people. As she struggled to get the words out, her mother's face turned pale, covering her mouth. Anna sobbed and exclaimed, "I finally realized that Mom and Dad truly loved me. I know I come off as thick-skinned, but I want us to be together like before." Her mother embraced her tightly, shedding tears while gently stroking her back. "You did well. It must have been so hard." Her mother consoled her. Anna replied, "But thanks to John, I'm really happy now," pointing towards me. Her mother noticed me for the first time, looking surprised, as I was about to explain when a deep, dignified voice interrupted. "What's going on here?" A deep, authoritative voice cut through the air. I turned towards the shadow emerging from the depths of the house, suspecting it was Anna's father. But the next moment, I found myself exclaiming in surprise, "Benjamin!" Anna echoed, "What's going on?" while the elderly man emerging from the house furrowed his brows in confusion. I had no time to worry about that, though, because he was the spitting image of the CEO of MP Corporation, where I worked. Realizing I hadn't asked Anna's maiden name, I frantically looked for the nameplate. The name Mason was engraved on it. No doubt about it. He was Benjamin, our company's president. That meant Nancy, in terms of age, could be Anna's sister. Noticing the president watching me in suspicion, I hastily introduced myself, and I added, "Thanks to John, I was able to leave my husband. He's been helping me a lot." Then, as I revealed my affiliation with MP Corporation's customer support department, Anna was taken aback. "Your company is my father's?" she exclaimed. She knew about the mistreatment I had received and my subsequent leave of absence. She turned to her father, the CEO, and angrily demanded an explanation. Caught off guard by Anna's accusations, the CEO blinked before muttering, "John, yes, I've heard of him. A client recently said it was a shame you're on leave." However, he quickly frowned and said, "But I was informed that you're on leave for medical treatment. What is this Anna is talking about?" He then led us inside to hear more about it. I was led into an elegant living room by Benjamin and his wife. There, Anna once again explained her situation to Benjamin. He listened seriously. At the end of her story, Anna said with conviction, "John is my life savior." Then, Anna's mother thanked me profusely. "I don't know how to thank you enough. I can only say this much, but thank you so much for saving my daughter." Benjamin also shook my hand as he thanked me. I shook my head, saying, "I didn't do anything grand. It was Anna who had the courage to step out of that environment. It was all her." But Anna insisted. "John always says that, but I was weak. I couldn't have left that place without his words and support. Now I want to help John too." She turned to the Benjamin. He solemnly nodded. "I would like to hear the real reason for your leave, John. I hesitated, my voice faltering. I was consumed by the fear of not being believed or facing further harassment. Such anxieties began to erode my mind. But seeing Anna's tearful face, I remembered my promise to her not to give in anymore. I cleared my throat, swallowed, and opened my parched mouth. After I finished speaking, a heavy silence filled the room. It was Benjamin who broke the silence first. He let out a heavy sigh, holding his forehead and groaning. My daughter went through all that. Beside him, Anna's mother's face turned pale. Anna couldn't believe that her own sister had done those things, her face turning bright red with shock and trembling. I can't believe it. Benjamin asked me if it was okay to call Nancy into the room. After a moment of hesitation, I nodded, resolute. Minutes later, Nancy entered the living room, saying, "What now?" I stiffened involuntarily, but Nancy's reaction was even more exaggerated. "What are you doing here?" she exclaimed. Benjamin immediately scolded her for her tone, and Nancy fell silent, glaring at me. Benjamin, looking intently at Nancy, began to speak. "I've heard from John. Is it true that you made up stuff to demote him and mistreated him?" Nancy widened her eyes and shouted in a fury, "That's all lies." But Benjamin unyieldingly announced that an internal investigation would be conducted. Nancy's face turned pale, and she screamed, "Stop it." Benjamin looked down at his daughter clinging to his arm and said, "If you fear being investigated, it's as good as admitting guilt." Nancy, stubbornly, kept pleading, but Benjamin paid her no more attention. She then turned her anger towards Anna. "You brought him here, didn't you? Just when you come back, you already caused trouble." It was me who stopped Anna from responding when Nancy shouted that. I held back Anna as she started to rise in response. I stood up to face Nancy squarely, and with a calm, assertive voice, I said, "I've decided not to be a victim anymore. Even without this opportunity, I would have confronted you." Nancy's mouth trembled violently at my words, as she vomited various insults. "You are just a useless burden who can't even do his job properly, acting all high and mighty." However, when Benjamin sharply reprimanded her with a loud "Nancy," she left the living room in a fit of rage, her face flushed red. A month later, I received a call from the company's HR department. I went to the company at the specified date and time, and there, Benjamin greeted me. Despite being at the company entrance, he shook my hands and gave me a hug. He had immediately initiated an internal investigation as he had declared that day. Nancy's wrongdoings were brought to light. All her actions were exposed. My colleagues in the department testified on my behalf. Furthermore, Nancy had continued to burden other employees and use abusive language even after I went on leave, which infuriated Benjamin. Nancy was fired and disowned, with no further assistance in finding employment. Growing up with the mindset that her parents would handle everything, Nancy panicked, but it was too late. Moreover, her boyfriend from this company, who she had even considered marrying, broke up with her. It was rumored in the company that he approached Nancy only for his career advancement and left her once she was no longer useful. Also, regretting having spoiled their daughter too much, Benjamin and his wife decided to push Nancy towards independence by making her leave the family home. Nancy, who never studied seriously and pushed her work onto others, now found herself struggling with job hunting. Anna was frustrated that Nancy frequently cried for help. Anna, meanwhile, resumed her work as a pharmacist as before her marriage. Working and prosecuting her husband made her life busy, but she remained positive and inspiring. I returned to work almost immediately after being called by Benjamin. Not only did I return, but I was also appointed as the president's assistant, a role directly assigned by Benjamin himself. Many clients had expressed regret over my absence, and the internal investigation revealed high praise for my knowledge and skills. The experience and knowledge I gained in customer support were invaluable in my new role, and Benjamin acknowledged my work. My parents, who had seen me hurriedly return to work and leave home, sent me off warmly. Feeling somewhat bashful, I deeply appreciated the love and support from my parents who congratulated me on my fresh start, saying, "It's truly wonderful," and I also cried tears of joy over my return. This experience led to losses but also significant gains and reaffirmations. It's not always possible to keep moving forward. Sometimes, we need to pause or even look back. That's when we should boldly embrace it as a period of self-reflection. Like my experience, it's likely that many new things will be gained or reaffirmed. With a bit more courage, it's okay to take steps forward. I may not be able to run at full speed yet, but I'm confident that I'm making progress, even if it's gradual. John, could you come here for a moment, please? Yes, right away. I smiled and hurried towards Benjamin.